Today we are with Osirus Polachart. He grew up in Los Angeles, California. He is a cafe board member at UC Berkeley and a student instructor for Central American History of Colonialism class. Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure having you here.
Yeah, thank you, Alejandra. Thank you for having me on this podcast. I really appreciate it. Get to talk about, being Central America, about Central America. And yeah, I've been teaching a class. I'm a board member for Central Americas for Empowerment. So I'm happy to speak with you today, especially since we have a event coming up. We have a documentary for La Mamplesa. Uh,
hmm
and it's a screening at UC Berkeley. So if you're listening to this right now, make sure you go to that event if you are in the Bay Area. But yeah, pleasure to speak with you today.
Yes, it's a pleasure. And yes, we do have an event, so we can talk more into that. So it's so excited to get to go see you guys over there and have this event together with you guys. But a little bit about I want to know a little bit about you. So tell me how was like your experience growing up as a Central American?
Yeah, I think I was talking to you before we started recording. My dad's Asian, my mom's
hmm
Central American. Um, I grew up mostly with my mom. I didn't grow up with my dad really. So, I was always raised around my mom and her cooking. And she always told me, like, yeah, we're from Honduras. I'm from Honduras, I'm from Choloma Cortes. And, she would always, talk about her experience, her experience with it was always deep shit. Like she was always talking about something that was just so deep. And it was like about abuse, family abuse, like sexual abuse and like, her having to go through like abusive relationships and coming up here to the United States and just finally like separating herself from all of that and then just being on her own with me, my brother and my sister. And that played I feel like it played a big role into how I was growing up because my mom, like, she would always tell us like, you always have to do things for other people. It's not just about you, it's not just about yourself. And especially me being a young boy, not having a father, not having like um you know
hmm
a father figure in my life. My mom really like stepped in and like she said, "I don't want you to
hmm
be like a man who hits women like those other men, and I don't want you to be
hmm
like my dad, who like feels like he can hit anybody anytime he wants." So I very much grew up like that. But my mom, like I said, single mother, raising three kids, and it was hard for her to even like get ahead in life because she didn't have a college degree. She didn't even pass
hmm
middle school. So my mom has a very limited amount of education, and she talks about how her parents never let her go to school because they wanted her to work, and that's valued more than going to school. And they forced her to get married when she was 14 years old, and they forced her to have a baby with the man too. And it was a lot of things that she told us about, and she told us about her experience. But what I get from what she told me is that her experience was just very traumatizing, and it was very not
hmm
normal, the conditions that she was living in. And then you
hmm
take that, you she had the passion and the fire in her to go to the United States. And I always ask her, um, why did you make that decision to go? She's like, to have a better life for my children. And I feel like most immigrant parents say that. Um,
Yeah. hmm
so she was here working in a factory. It was called Ready Pack at the time. Um, and she worked there for 12 years, but she struggled. Like, we were homeless at some points, and we were just going from motel to motel, people's backyards, the garages. And at the time when I was a kid, I didn't really think much of it. I was just like, all right, I'm a little kid, I'm having fun, I'm like running around the motel. Those little brochures that they have in the
hmm
in the lobbies of hotels and stuff like that. I would grab all of them and then like just like spread them around the whole hotel. Like I was having fun as a kid. Like I didn't even think much of it, but I remember my mom was really
Mhm.
sad. Um, and that was just like that was just like honestly, I didn't even know what was going on until I got
Mhm.
older, and then I was like, "Oh shit, we were homeless." I didn't even know what was going on,
Mhm.
and um, growing up, we still struggled. Every time there was a food drive at school, I would bring my canned foods to school,
Mhm.
and I'll be like, yeah, because they would have like class competitions, who can raise the most cans in their classroom, and then I would bring all these canned
Mhm.
foods, all excited, and I'm like, yeah, like we're gonna win as a classroom, and then eventually, like I remember at the end of school one day, they just gave me like a bunch of like canned foods. Like all the canned foods, they were like, "Whoa, why am I getting the canned foods? I thought they was going to poor people." And then I was like, "Wait,
Um,
we are the poor people." And then we had
mhm.
my mom was shocked because she was like, "Why are they giving us all this food?" Um,
Mhm.
and but you don't realize that until later. But that's very much how I
Yeah.
grew up. I didn't grow my mom like I said, my mom worked all day, every day. My siblings had, went their own separate ways, so it was just really me and my mom um, growing up. But she didn't have time because she had a job. She had to put
Mhm.
food on the table and my roof over my head. Um, so I didn't really spend a lot of time with my mom. I spent a lot of time with babysitters. Um, and through those babysitters, like I just learned so much like bad stuff that I was not supposed to learn. Like some of my babysitters, were drug dealers. Some people, I was in some neighborhoods where I witnessed people like get murdered, and that was just normalized to me as a young kid, and I just didn't really think much of it. I remember just being poor, going through all of that, and then finally moving to Covina, California, when my mom found my stepdad, and things got a little bit
Mhm.
better after that. But my mom got injured at work. She couldn't. There's a lot of migrant workers at that factory job that they have. There's a lot of
Mhm.
Central Americans too. I'll get to that like another point, but I'm gonna reach into like different tangents. But
Mhm.
she got hurt and she was disabled. My mom couldn't do anything. So I didn't. My mom. There was no income. Like there was nothing that I could do
Yeah.
to help my situation.
Mhm.
I was just entering high school. I had a girlfriend at the time. I was trying to go on nice little dates and stuff like that. I was trying to go to the movies, trying to get
Mhm.
something to eat after school. But I remember always being that one person that just didn't have money to go. And if I did go to the movies, I was
Mhm.
gonna sneak in. Like there was just no way I was gonna pay for my ticket to go in. Um, and I just remember being so frustrated with myself at one point where I was just like, you know what? A lot of kids where I was going were selling weed. So I was like, you know what?
Mhm.
I'm gonna do the same thing. So I started getting into weed and started like selling it. And that's how I made a little bit of money so that way I could pay for like, McDonald's after school or something like that, 7-Eleven, some chips and a big gulp,
Mhm.
something like that. And then, I started getting more greedy with myself and it went from weed to pills to other drugs that were
Mhm.
just a lot more heavier. And you know at some point I was just like, this isn't really the life I want to live. I think it was till I was 17, 18 where I started thinking like that. um and I finally got to the point where I was like, I wasn't doing great in school. I was always a bad student. I was always getting in trouble with fights and stuff like that. I was always getting in trouble with drugs, always getting caught up with stuff like that. A lot of the principals and
Mhm.
teachers and stuff like that would always say like, I'm headed nowhere good. I'm gonna end up being like dead or in jail or something because I just wasn't doing
Mhm.
well. And when you put that into somebody's mind, you start to believe it. and you start to think that way
Yeah.
too, and then you're just like,
Mhm.
I don't think much of myself. Like I don't think I'm gonna make it in this world. I really don't care about anything. Um, but yeah, I ended up going in a spiral. I got addicted to drugs and stuff like that. So that's how I grew up as a Central American.
Mhm.
Like, and honestly, at the time, I wasn't even thinking about Central America. Like, I wasn't even connecting those dots yet. I wasn't thinking about the 400 years of exploitation.
Mhm.
I wasn't thinking about my grandparents being orphans. I wasn't thinking about
Mhm.
the way my mom was living and how it connects to the way we live here. I wasn't thinking about any of that. To me, to be honest with you, I didn't really think of myself as like Central America. I didn't really think about the identity as much. To me, because
Mhm.
my mom always told me like, you're not Hondureño. She's like, you're American. And I was like, well, okay, I guess I'm
Mhm.
American. And then I would just be like, well, and sometimes I would get frustrated because I didn't want to be American either. So like when people would ask me where I'm from,
Mhm.
I'll be like, "Oh, I'm from Canada," or "I'm from like Hawaii." I would say random things so that way people like
Mhm.
just wouldn't know. And
Mhm.
honestly, it wasn't until after I went through my whole spiral and had to go through so many things where I finally like turned it around. I was like, I need to turn around my situation because the way my mom is right now, being disabled, not having money for
Mhm.
herself, the way my family is right now, just not having anything for themselves and just constantly saying like next year is going to be good. Next year we're going to fix things. Next month is going to be better.
Mhm.
And then next year comes and nothing changes. It's the same thing. It's the same thing
Mhm.
if not worse. So, I
Mhm.
decided to change this whole thing around. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go back to school. I'm gonna actually do well in school to see what I can do with myself because I'm not living my life like this. I'm not doing this forever.
Mhm.
So I ended up, uh, yeah, going back to school and eventually like turning it around. Then I got into speech and debate. I did more of the speech part. Those awards that you see right here, that's
Mhm.
from that.
Mhm.
And that's when I started to learn more about the Central American identity. That's when I started to learn about
Okay.
the exploitation and all these things because they ask you, what do you want to speak about? What do you want to talk about? And I wanted to talk about my mom's experience of her immigrating here.
Mhm.
And then then they said, okay, here's some books. Here's what you need to research. Go out, research, write a speech, come back, and then we'll help you out. And then I was like, okay, cool. And once I started to get to researching, once I started to get to reading, man,
Mhm.
after that I was like, wow, this all connects together. This, like I started
Yeah.
connecting the dots and I was like, wow, like
Mhm.
the reason I had to live my life the way I lived it was because it has been nonstop like poverty, nonstop violence, nonstop abuse in my
Traumas.
family, and it
Mhm.
passed down from generations to generations. And even if we get here to the United States, and we live here in the Bay Area, Los Angeles. Some people live in
Mhm.
Virginia. Central Americans live everywhere. You don't live in Beverly Hills. You don't live in Anaheim Hills. You don't live in the nicest
Mhm.
areas. You live in like you know. And most of the time where I lived in the hood, where there was just not enough resources. Everybody's like gang banging, drinking, doing drugs, selling drugs, doing shit
Mhm.
like that. So that's what I got my mentality from. And
Mhm.
honestly, it stems from all that. Like it all connects to each other. And then I started
Yep.
thinking, like, you know what? This is what I want to do. I want to start, talking about it. But that was my experience. I didn't really reach the
Mhm.
identity of being Central American until I was like 19. I didn't really think about
Mhm.
until then. I was Honduran and Thai, Hondureño and Thai.
Mhm.
I wasn't thinking
Mhm.
Central American until I read more about it, and then I saw people tweeting, writing articles about being Central American, all the wars that happened. Even before that, there was a lot of like civil wars that happened, and I know that now because I teach a class. But before that, like when I was just
Mhm.
learning about it, it was all new to me. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was then I started thinking like that's the life of a Central American. And I was wondering how many other
Mm.
people live that same life. Um,
Yep.
but yeah,
Mhm.
that's pretty much
Yeah.
how I grew up. I know that was a long
Damn.
story, but yeah,
No, but still, but I feel like when you were telling the story, especially if your mom, how she grew up in Honduras and how like she had to work, like is like it just brought me back of like when you go to Honduras, Central America, you see a lot of like child labor, right? And I
yeah,
always talk about like that shouldn't be, right? No matter like even you're younger than 18 or something like that, like why those are like our communities prioritize like work over like education. And I know like it's a system of at the same, it's the system that makes us that way, right? Because
mhm,
like parents is it's easier for a parent to send a child to work on the streets rather than to send a child to school, right? And then I mean it's more deeper like when we talk about education in Central America, right? And then at the same time, then your mom make the decision to migrate here. That's another trauma on itself, right? That she
yeah,
couldn't heal from what she was already experiencing back home. And now she gets here and it's the same cycle, right? And like you said, like Central Americans, most of the time we go to these communities where like, yeah, sometimes like un amigo, like a friend or like a family member is living there and like, oh, you stay here. But those are the areas where like, it based in like say in LA, like they don't take care. You know what I mean? Like they're just like, oh, it's the hood. I like whoever. You know what I mean? Well, that's where the gangs are, right? But no, there's where a lot of people like migrate because either like they could afford a living in those areas, right? Because it's of
yeah,
course it's cheaper, to get a house, to get an apartment. But then like what, like there's no resources, and now you had to experience like go through high school, had to go into the route of drugs, and that's another thing, right? Like it's not just, oh, it was my fault, right? It's a whole system, it's a whole like repeatable cycle, it's a whole, not even like the cycle of trauma, but the cycle of poverty, like that your family has come since Honduras and even generations before. And like you said, like a lot of abuse, a lot of things that had happened in our communities that had led us to that. And then you come here and it's like it's the same, right? Like there's the same thing as a cycle, and until we start to understanding
yeah,
and we start to put in like, oh, like what I mean, like, oh, it's I kind of don't want to live this life, right? Like what can I do, how can I learn, what can I do better for for my parents and stuff like that. That's when we start realizing and putting thoughts together. And I'm glad that you kind of like were able to realize it, because there's a lot of people who couldn't. There's
yeah,
a lot of people who have passed for drug, have passed during like migration, have passed for pottery, because they didn't realize that it's not their fault. It's not their fault. It's this whole system that sadly puts us in that route.
yeah. And another thing too is when you get here to the United States, there's an added expectation because you're expected to make money and then you're expected to send it back.
Yes. Yeah, and it's the same of like dependency, right? And then I mean, in Central America, they're like remesas. They're like a huge economic boost for Central America. They're like, I'm not very sure like the right percentage, but it's very high, right? Remesas is something that like runs the economy now in Central America, and it's like, well, like I always think about like, for example, like, I migrated here when I was 14. Of course, like I have family over there, I have my dad and my parents, but like I don't have someone who was say like dependable, right? Like that I have to send. But what if I was a young Alejandra, I took the decision, I had a family, I had a kid, right? I left the kid over there. And I had to send money over there because they're taking care of my kid, right? At the same time, you need to make your meet ends here, and then now you have to take care of over there. But then there's the distance, right? Like you're not with your child, then the child thinks that you abandoned him
Yeah,
or her, right? And it's like the same cycle. And then like, what if, let's say the person comes back, they're de ahora te empiezan a reprochar, like, why do you left me, right? And it's a whole cycle at the same time, like it's a whole system. Like the system has failed us, and I think we can see it every repetitive time. Immigration and so education and everything.
yeah, yeah. No, I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. Um, yeah, just going to your point about the kids, like,
Mhm.
feeling like their parents don't love them. I had like a
Mhm.
similar experience with that where my nephew, he was traveling up here, migrating up to the United States, but he was with his
Mhm.
mom. He was with his mom and his brother, and they got to Mexico and they caught them at the border and they put them in a refrigeration room for I don't know how many hours, but it was all the way up to the point where my little nephew was sick. And instead of finding medical care for him, they just sent him back to Mexico and then told him to figure it out themselves. But long story short, he's okay now. But through the child reunification program that they have here, uh,
Mhm.
we were able to take him in, but his mom wasn't able to get in at the same time. So we took his. It's crazy because they talk about child reunification program, but then
Mhm.
um, he was with his mom, and they basically separated him from his mom to go with us. And now his mom is in
Mhm.
Maryland, and we're out here in California, and they're still separated. And when I see this kid talking to his mom, it's like it's almost like he doesn't want to talk to her. Like he just
Mhm.
doesn't. I know he loves his mom because he tells me that he loves her, and that I told him, if you had $1 million, what would you do? And then he was like, I'll bring my mom into the United States. That's the only thing he said. And I was like, that's so
Mhm.
sad. That was before his mom came to Maryland, but I was like, that's so
Mhm.
sad. I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, then how come he doesn't like talking to his mom? Like, he just seems like he doesn't like think
Mhm.
about it, or he doesn't think that his mom loves him anymore, and it's kind of sad. And then like I myself as well as my family try to show him that love, so that way like it's not missing. But he
Mhm.
does have like sort of like a disdain towards his mom, like he I don't know. And then I try to tell him it's not her fault, like you said, it's the system
Yeah.
that does it.
Mhm. Yeah. It's the same thing, it's funny because like I have read a lot of like, child reunification, and even like when people are migrating here, when you now they put them with a parent now, right? Of course there's still like, the circumstances and the places with the parent is not humane, but before, like, there were kids separated at 2 years old from their parents, like, and
Yeah,
then now, like you said, like, um your is your nephew, right?
yeah,
No, nephew, right? Okay, your nephew is still separated from his mom, and or like, and then that bond or like that trauma will continue. He will feel like that way, and even it wasn't because of his mom. Maybe his mom never wanted to be separated from him,
yeah.
but
She
it
did.
had to be that way because of a system. You
Yeah,
know, it's
yeah,
just so sad. It's just, growing up as a Central American, I think like at this point, after talking with so many people, it's like we just need to acknowledge that we have a bunch of traumas and like we know, and that is not our fault, and like to kind of say, hey, it's okay to feel this way, it's okay that you went through that, it's not your fault, and this is a
mhm,
community that we need to acknowledge that and how to speak up about it, because I feel like in the past our parents didn't do it because of fear. And yeah, we have still have a lot of like young immigrants, and there's still a fear, right? But it's like, well, we have to talk about what happened to us, right? What happened to
mhm,
us, because it's not just migration, it's not just imperialism, and over there it's not just a lot of stuff,
mhm.
it's multiple area.
Lot of
And
things.
it's like, mm-hmm, yeah. And it's
Yeah,
like, well, it's we're not the only ones going through this, it's a whole community, and knowing that there's a lot of people that and understand us, and it's like, oh, you know what I mean, like I listen to your story and it's like I can relate, you know and I'm sure like people who are listening to this is like they can relate too, because this sadly this is how we grew up.
yeah, yeah, and that's what I try to make the point of. Even in my class, I'm like, you know what? Like, we may live different lives, in our own personal lives, whatever. It may have gone differently. Some of us may have gone through worse things. Some of us, but nonetheless, I feel like we all share almost the same misery. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like the same suffering that you know that we had to go through. Some, like I said, it may be different in various ways. Some might even be worse.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, like I don't really think there's a happy story to be told here. It's very
Mm.
pessimistic. But I think the happy story um, is something that we can build. It's something that we can make for ourselves. Because
Yes.
after so long of just abuse and exploitation and making you feel like you're less than human, I feel like there has to come a point where you just say stop. Like this is it.
Mhm.
There's no more
Yep.
suffering here. Like we want to create, something where we can be happy for once and have joy for once.
Mhm.
Um, and I definitely think that's possible. I still feel like some on your aspect of like trauma and trying to deal with that and saying that that's okay. I feel like um, for the young Central Americans, I feel like I see that trend happening. A lot of more people are focusing on
Mhm.
joy instead of just reminiscing on the past and just thinking, you know, about
Mhm.
everything that happened. Um, which isn't
Yeah.
which is to say that it isn't wrong, but you can't dwell on it too much because it will consume you. Um,
Mhm.
but I would say like the older Central Americans living here, that I feel like they just don't take mental health as serious. So they're
They
just
don't.
like they never deal with the trauma. It's just like they just
Mhm.
hold it deep down inside and just never talk about it. And like I see it even with
Mhm.
my mom. Like sometimes my mom has some trauma responses that I'm just like, oh my god, like she's really overreacting right now. But my mom will never, never, ever say that she's traumatized or that she feels some type of way about her past or anything like that. She'll never say that. She's so hard headed. I know how she is, and she just won't accept the fact that she went through so much. Like she knows that she went through so much,
Mhm.
but she just won't accept the fact that she has feelings towards it.
Yeah, and I feel like you brought really nice points of like not difference, but like the new Central American generation, right? Like, because I feel like if we kind of like put it into different parts, if I make to divide it, we have the first generation for parents, right? The
Mhm.
parents who migrated here after Civil War, the parents who migrated here after Hurricane Mitch, parents who migrated here for X, Y, and Z reason, because not all of it's just, you know, everybody has different reasons for migration, right?
Yeah.
And then we have us, like I was like the middle age, right?
Right.
Um, who are like either first generation migrant or you're a migrant or a young migrant, right? And then you have the younger generation who are growing up. Our parents were the ones who take it everything to themselves, didn't show love, they didn't not love but didn't show
Yeah.
what their feelings, that's what I meant to say, they didn't show their feelings, they kept it everything to themselves, they didn't realize that going through a war, migration, and everything can cause like it cause a lot of trauma, and there is of course result of that. And that's our parents, right, is coming to a place where like they just want to keep themselves, and they're like they don't want to say where they're from, they don't want to be proud, even though if they're proud of who where they're from or who they how they were back in in their home countries, they still feel like scared to say it based on discrimination, based on a lot of community. Then is us that like we grew up kind of in the middle, right? We grew up in the middle of like, hey, like I understand, well, like we taking it as trauma because trauma is passed generation to generation, and we're like, I understand that. And then now I am like we have the privilege, right, to go to school and like to read about it. Parent things that might have been normalized in our countries might have been just taken not very serious in consideration. Like, what is like, I'm not saying the Civil War is not taken serious, but imperialism, a lot of like, we name it. There's a lot of stuff. And we're here like, hey, this actually like okay, this shouldn't have happened. This is kind of what it leads to why my parents migrated or why I had to migrate, like why like everything is como que está, clicking. Like we're the ones who put in the dots together. And
Mhm.
then the younger generation who are the ones who are enjoying, like not enjoying, but like technically being proud, right? Because we have been kind of like the bridge of our parents who couldn't be proud of who they are, who couldn't be outspoken or like, oh yes, I'm happy to be Salvadorian, I'm happy to be Honduran, or like, Central American. But at the same time, it's like it's so happy to see you young kids like, be proud. But I also like recognize that there's a lot of learning, and then at the same time we need to continue developing, we need to continue learning what happened to us in the past in order for us to continue building something, right? Because like from us, like that's why like I'm trying to divide it in I hope that makes sense, the whole example. But the middle ones are the ones who like, it creates, for example, like a podcast, there's a bunch of pages, there's a like now there's articles being written and stuff like that, and we're the ones who are creating it because our parents couldn't, because our parents had that obstacle, because our parent has to migrate, because our parents need to take that decision to,
Mhm.
man, like, the other things that happened to our parents and they were not saying, but we're here saying it for them, right? But the reason why we say it for them is for people to know that it happens, that this is a good community, this is a community to build, and for the younger generation to acknowledge that this is where we come from, but that say celebrate the identity that for so long was so like minimized on us, right? Because we couldn't say that we were Salvadorian, we couldn't say that we were Hondurans, because it will become with a stereotype, right? And I feel like now the stereotype is Central American, even though like I always talk like there's still like, even depends where you grow up, of course, but here based in LA, like, you still have como te dan ojitos, right? When you say like you're from Central America, or you're Honduran, or you're Salvadoran, but it's less. I personally feel like it's less because people are being more acknowledged of the cultural, are being
Mhm.
more aware that Central Americans exist, and that we have a different culture, that we have a different like upbringing, right? So yeah, that was a lot in my example, but this is how I would say, like I would divide like the generation. I will probably explain it, how like, the reason why our communities have gone through this journey, and how like nowadays we see, right? Oh, the new generations are happy, and they're like, oh yes, like, I'm Salvadorian, I'm Salvi, I'm Honduran, like they're proud, and I'm happy too. But it's like, hey, also sit down with us. We need to continue learning.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's a big thing too, and that's a big reason why I teach the class in the first place. Because now you see a lot of people, claiming Central American, and they're proud to be Central American. You even got all these different, pages on Twitter and Instagram, like, Central American art. You know,
Mhm,
there's just a lot of there's a lot more on social media now that I've noticed.
mhm,
I don't know if it's because like I started getting into the community, started following more people, but
mhm,
I have noticed that there's a lot more people talking about the issues, and that's why Central American Studies is being pushed across all California campuses.
mhm.
Um, because Cal State Northridge has one, ELAC just implemented one, and
Yeah.
UCLA has one, but it's technically mixed in with the Latinx Chicanx department, which
Mhm.
I think honestly it has to be a separate department, um, and
Yeah.
I don't want to be
Mhm.
divisive when I say that because I do know a lot of great people in Chicanx Latinx studies. I do know a lot of great people in you know in these departments, but at the same time I just don't think that they necessarily teach it in the way that we would like
Mhm.
to. I think the curriculum has to be different. Um,
Yeah.
Mainly because a lot of students who, go into like the Chicanx Latinx studies department, then you're required to take classes that are also on Chicanx
Mhm.
studies as well. And from what I've noticed in the Chicanx Latinx studies department classes, it's just that there's not really a Central American narrative pushed. And if you try to even bring up the
Mhm.
Central American narrative, it's kind of everybody kind of looks at you like you're being divisive, or people kind of look at you like
Yes.
why are you talking about, Central America? We should be together. We shouldn't be against each other. But it's like you
Mhm.
also have to realize that there's a lot of Mexican nationalism that comes from people in Mexico that,
Mhm.
that tell people from Central America to go back. And it's the same thing that the
Yeah.
United States is doing. But honestly,
Mhm.
the nationalism that comes from Mexico, I feel like is also something that is a threat to Central Americans as well. And sometimes when
Yeah.
we try to speak out about it in Chicanx Latinx studies, a lot of these people talk back to us like, like like we're being divisive. Um,
Yeah.
for that reason, I
Mhm.
definitely I think like these two fields need to be studied separately. There might be a lot of
Yeah.
overlap. There might be, and
Mhm.
because the story about Chicanx studies is a story about exploitation as well. It's a story about migration as well. The
Mhm.
diaspora and how the diaspora thinks about things. But at the same time, I think Central American studies should be its own. That's why we're trying to push for it here on campus. But getting back to the class that I teach, um, yeah, honestly, we have a questionnaire that we send to students
Mhm.
to fill out before they join the class, just because we want to get a sense of where people are at, why people want to take the class, and what reasons are people wanting to take the class. And I think the number one response that always comes out to me, it's just people always say, it's almost every application, is that they don't understand anything about their history, that they don't know anything about about what it was like
Wow.
in El Salvador, what it was like in Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, wherever a student may be from.
Mhm.
They're very proud to say, I'm here as a Central American, but they don't know much. They don't know about the history.
Mhm.
And it's important to know about the history because if you look at the history, you know, Central America and the Central American nations, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Belize, Panama, all of the Central American states, um, they when they created independence, it wasn't an independence of all people. It wasn't freedom and liberation for all people because even when the independence happened, there was still slavery going on. There was still,
Mhm.
indigenous people were still working on the plantations, working for no money at all, or just like a place to live, which is technically slavery.
Mhm.
And it's happened for so long, and the white criollos at the top just managed to keep those positions in power. And then when we talk
Mhm.
about being Hondureño, being Central American and stuff like that, like we have to also make sure that we're not being you know you know having a sentiment or not having a sentiment or just being anti-indigenous and anti-black,
Yep.
because a lot of the
Mhm.
times this Central Americanness is almost like mestizaje, where
Mhm.
you're kind of you know saying that you're this identity and trying to group in all these types of people, but at the end of the day, like
Mhm.
some indigenous people are just like, I'm not Guatemalteca. Like I come from, I'm Quiche,
Mhm.
or I'm Mam. Uh,
Mhm.
they don't say that
Mhm.
they're from Central America. They're from a tribe. They're from a nation themselves. Uh,
Mhm.
and there's a history of this, and this history is the same history of exploitation. It's the same history of colonialism, and it's the same system of slavery. And we have to learn these things because if not, we're just going to keep saying things, or
Mhm.
being proud of something without knowing exactly what it is. And I
Yeah.
always think that's something that's dangerous, because what we try to do in the class is just try to uncover the truth. um, this truth is just you know Central America has been very anti-indigenous. It has been very anti-black. It has
Mhm.
still had white supremacy instilled in it. And as much as we try to separate from, the United States and its atrocities, and the United States has done so many terrible things in Central America, considering the civil
Mhm.
wars and the banana republics, and taking all the land away for corporations. But at the same time,
Mhm.
you have to realize that the same systems that occur in the United States, mass incarceration, uh, racism, classism, it's still that all those
Mhm.
things apply to Central America as well. Um,
Mhm. Yep.
and it's okay to be like proud of where you're from, but at the same time, you have to be critical about where you're from. Um, and I think,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
it's important to do that because you look at what Bukele is doing now in El Salvador with Bitcoin and all those projects that he has, and then the state of exception, mass incarcerating people on the streets. That's a prime example of um, of the exploitation that happened. Because when you have 400 years of exploitation, colonialism, slavery, all that stuff, it dehumanizes a population. And when you have so much
Mhm.
war, so much violence going on around you, people just tend to think, oh, like, violence is just an everyday thing. Like killing human life then becomes something that's disposable. It's not
Mhm.
something that is valued. Um,
Mhm.
and that's a product of 400 years of exploitation. It's a product of the wars that happen, manipulation of political structures and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But um, it's important to understand that because you know some people just it was the craziest thing I heard someone say because I was talking to them about El Salvador, and they were Salvadoreño, and they were talking to me about um, why they left and how because this guy is a huge Bukele fan, and I was just trying to
Mhm.
understand where he was coming from. And I told him about the mass incarceration, the state of exception. I'm like, what do you think about that? Like, they're just incarcerating anybody who they think is a gang member. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I think that's fine. He's like, it has to be. He's like, it has to be done in order to fix the gang violence that happens in El Salvador. Because if you want to get rid of the gang violence, you have to get rid of all the people, as well as some people are going to be innocent going into jail. So whatever. And then he talked about how his cousin got locked up because of the state of exception. And I was like, so does your cousin deserve that kind of treatment because they're trying to get rid of gang violence? He's like, yeah. And then I was just astounded because I'm just like, these people just don't value life as much as, like, we're supposed to. And it almost seems kind of dystopian, um
Mhm.
because it just sort of seems like a different world. But then again, like, who
Mhm.
am I to tell him anything? I'm just somebody who lived here in America my whole life. I don't,
Mhm.
I'm not from El Salvador, so I'm not going to tell him what's right or
Mhm.
wrong. um, I'll let him figure that him out himself. I'm
Yep.
not imposing myself on anybody. Um, but
Mhm.
yeah, I just think after
Yeah.
so long, I think it's important to understand that, through this class especially, that all everything has conditioned us to, one, view ourselves as laborers, view ourselves as people who work, uh, and
Mhm.
two, um, throughout all this history, we've been learning to undervalue human life, and we have to start to value that human
Mhm.
life again. Because if we just go
Yeah.
back to the same things, um, you know, go back to saying, like, we want a war. Of course, like, there's a
Mhm.
lot of things that happen in Central America. There's a lot of exploitation, and I get people are angry. Like, I'm angry. I'm angry when I read these
Mhm.
things and I'm teaching it to students and I see them, they get angry too. They get angry at all the things that are happening. And yeah, I'm angry um as well. But at the same time, we
Mhm.
have to we have to understand that human life is important as well. And if we just go out and, start a war and then continuing the same cycle that we've been in over and over and over again. Um
Yeah.
and those are the those
I
that's what's
100% agree.
important to me, and that's why I
Yeah.
teach the class because I'm trying to get people to make those connections, but also learn these things that we need to unlearn.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yes. 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 I'm gonna. That was a lot, to uncover, to
yeah,
kind of for me to like. But to be honest, I 100% agree with you. In the sense of like, as someone who I call myself privileged that went to season and had Central American studies, right? Not a lot of people have the privilege to go to school and
yeah,
learn about it, right? So every time we hear, like, for example, when I learned you were teaching this class and, like, push for Central American studies, there's always that comment that you just made. Why being so divisive? Why you guys, why cannot be like just Latin American studies? And to my answer is one, there's different experiences, right? Like, for example, Hondurans are like, where myself, I'm a Honduran, but Central Americans are not very familiar with what was the El Bracero program back in the
yeah,
days, right?
uh-huh,
Because they were mostly Mexicans who were coming to, to California to work in farmers.
yeah,
My family, my ancestors, can relate to that, right? But Mexicans, Chicanos can't, right? And I'm not saying that I don't want to learn it. Of course, I learned it and I would like to read it in general, but that's just the one example, right? The same thing as, what is the reason for Mexican migration? There's a different, of course, a lot of can be, oh, economically or stuff, but there's different. Like, I always say, every person has a reason to migrate. It can not only be for economically, it can be for other stuff. But I am not very familiar, like the back in the days reason of migration, right? It can be also because of resources, which, because of the lack of resources happen all throughout Latin America, right? Well, if we go to South America, why, I don't know, Colombians are in type of migration, right? Or Argentina or Chile, right? Chile tuvo no sé si lo estoy diciendo bien, pero it was under, like, it was a Pinochet on Chile, right?
yeah, yeah. It was under like
I
a
think it was
U.S.
in
backed
Chile.
dictatorship
What
or something like that.
happened? I am not very familiar, if it was during Chile. But what I'm saying is that each country, each region has different history, right? It has different history of one migration. It has different history of their political. What I was saying is that each region is different, right? South American identity house, South
Yeah,
American immigration reasons, South American political environment, South American history is, even if we can talk that we do have similarities, there are things that are different, right? It also goes to the same Mexico part, even El Caribe, right? We talk about Cuba, we talk about Haiti, we talk about República Dominicana, we can go to Argentina. Also, every country, every region have one different,
hmm,
reason of migration, to different reason, like political environments, different history and political, events that have happened to them. And at the same time, and I'm not
yeah,
saying that I don't want to learn about South America, I don't want to learn about Mexico. It's just that when it's time for us to learn about us, right? When it's time for us to learn about us, because no one focus on Central America. The usual people don't see us as either even a region to be studied, right? Until we came and we said it, we want to study what happened, what was the reason before the Civil War, what happened, with the FMLN, what happened with the FS, what happened with Chiquita, what happened with that fruit company. That didn't happen until we came and we said we want to study ourselves. That didn't came until we were the ones pushing for that, and we were the ones like it for us. We're here. We're trying to, you know, there's the migration, and like we can go a lot of like in the area of like the gangs, right? Because a lot of people compare us to gangs. A lot of people saying, well, Central America is very violent, but Central America is this. But then do we know the history of gangs? It started here in LA. It started here in LA. It's not that we don't want to learn. It's not that we are being divided. It's just that no one has ever seen us and see, what happened there?
Yeah,
Until we came and we said, we're tired. Why the United States is all up in their things? You know what I
yeah,
mean? Why is the CIA like funding this war? Why is there so many armed? Why the contras existed? Why the United States? Until we came, we asked those questions. We were the one who did the research. We were the ones who went and studied and think to the people who did all those amazing papers because we're honestly the only papers we could find because there's not a lot of Central American studies in academia or even paper. It's hard to find them. It's hard to find them. And even going to Central American studies, like it's hard to find papers. It's so hard to
yeah,
find academic written papers. So it's not for us to be divisive. It's just that I feel like everyone should learn uno pues lo que quieren es aprender, right? If like I'm not saying that yo no quiero aprender de Latinoamérica, but what I'm saying is that I also want to learn about myself because no one would care because simple and sencillamente in Central American in Latin American study, no one's care about Central America. The only thing you will study is the Panama Canal, and I already know that thing from start to
yeah,
finish. And I'm sorry if I'm getting angry, but it's like it's tiring, right?
yeah,
Because we have so much. It's tiring to people just think that whatever was funded by the US and France is the only important thing in a region. And then they don't care about our existence. They don't care about why we came in, why we're suffering, why our governments are like that, why we suffer through so many years in Honduras, con un narco gobierno, why the Nicaragua still like in a communist, you know what I mean? Like it's just like a lot.
yeah,
It's just no one. Hasta que you came and we're like, we want to study ourselves because no one's gonna do it.
yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
I got
And
heated.
I think there's a lot of younger Central Americans now who do want to learn that, and I think that's why there's a
Mm-hmm.
growing popularity because you had the first wave of Central Americans coming in at the late '80s, and then the '90s was the big one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but my mom got here in the late '80s, and you know those kids who came here who were even born here with their parents,
Mm-hmm.
you know, eventually started wanting to learn more about themselves. And it's like almost
Mm-hmm.
like the story that I told you, where I didn't even realize I was really Central American until I was
Mm-hmm.
19 years old and I read about everything. And I was like,
Yep.
wow, and it's that point where you want to learn more, and you're like, wow, where can I
Mm-hmm.
find more readings? Well, where can I learn more? And then you look for things, and there's nothing there. Like you literally, and
There's
if there
none.
is, and this is something that I've learned through researching because I do
Mm-hmm.
plan to go out to grad school one day and just write papers myself about this stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
as I'm looking for things right now, it's either told in the sense of an American um, student doing their dissertation on Latin America for some reason. It's told by their
Mm-hmm.
eyes, or is told by some corporation that really wants an investment in Central America, so they create a report to
And we're still
justify
stuck.
their whatever they want to invest in. And I noticed that there's only a few really uh, Central American uh, journalists, people who are studying Central America that are still continuing to add on to these studies. But yeah, it's really told from the Western gaze. Like people just look at it from a perspective, not really
Mm-hmm.
understanding where you come from. Now you have students um in grad school right now, or like studying Central America right now, that are really trying to put in their own studies, and they're adding to Central American studies. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the growing popularity. It comes from us. It comes from you know
Yep.
You doing
Yeah.
this podcast, me doing this class, people on social media creating different things for Central Americans and diaspora.
Mhm.
It comes from that, and then the more we talk about it, the more we put our narratives out there, the more people are going to be interested
Mhm.
themselves, because eventually,
Mhm.
you reach that one person who doesn't think about being Central American themselves. Even in Los Angeles, a
Yep.
lot of people just go to the default Mexicans. Like, everybody
Mhm.
everybody racializes you as being Mexican, and that's just the truth
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
America. Like, that's just, and then sometimes it was like I said earlier, people tell you you're something so many times you start to believe it. Like, you start to think yourself like,
Yes.
oh, I'm Mexican, I'm
Mhm.
just like everybody else here. Like, you know,
Mhm.
and you don't really think much of it. But when we talk about
Yep.
these things and we talk to the people about it, we teach classes about it, and you get people to open their eyes, and they're like, "Oh wow, like
Yep.
this whole history, this is my history. I didn't even know nothing about it."
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, and I want to add to that because as someone who like I went to school in Honduras for 14 years, right?
Yeah,
And I have shared this here. One of the hardest thing ever was to quitarme la venda de los ojos when I was studying Central American from here.
yeah,
And I'm not saying like, oh, like, because I study in the United States, right? You know what I mean? I'm not pointing
yeah,
that point. What I'm saying is that in Honduras, in Central America, we tend to glorify the United States. We tend that everything that comes from here is perfect, right? And whatever history, what actually, like you said, our history is not taught. Like no, like it's like I swear to God, like it's just like how many times I went to, I used to be hasta seventh grade, right? And yeah, that can happen. We talk about the curriculum here in the United States. We don't talk also about
the curriculum.
a lot of like geography or even Latin America, but you learn about your country, right? Like you learn about what happened in independence. Of course, it it is told from a privileged perspective because in my said I knew like los garifunas, I knew like la comunidad indígena, but I only knew the side of glorification from Cristobal Colon that they teach you in school,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? But like, do I have to like, migrate or do the research myself to know what was the atrocidades that the United States did, or that El Salvador has an Afro Salvadoran community, which is
Mhm.
like mind blowing. I have started like I am personally that like every country was proud to have Afro descent because I just assume everybody knew, right? I didn't know until I came here and like a community were like, oh yeah, people in El Salvador think that there's no black people, and I'm like, wait, what? I thought like we all knew, right? Like so, like you know what I mean? Like this is the reason why is study those areas
Mhm.
comes right, and like you said, um, in my case, I'm like, it was hard to come here and quitarme like, wow, what I thought it was Honduras, my perfect, beautiful country. It's not,
Yeah.
right? And you made a really good point. Like we're not perfect, and I think that's part of how I can be to be Honduran. I'm gonna be as critical as I can because I don't want to see my see people suffer. I don't, and people over there might think like, oh, hey, like why are you coming? You're coming with the gringo idea. It's not the gringo ideas. It's the thing that we're over there blind. We're over there blind glorifying someone who's
Yeah.
harming us,
Yeah.
right? And I can go on this because it's true like how many times we saw like the United States as the perfect person, as the perfect, oh, it's bringing jobs, it's bringing all this, but this what is harming us in the long run. And of course I'm not saying that imports imperialist, it has to be a balance, but at the same time it's like why do we rather learn more or external, or like why do we want to learn more from outside rather than the inside? Why do we don't want to learn about ourselves?
Yeah. You were talking about glorifying people who
Hmm.
are hurting us and stuff like that. Yeah, like I definitely, yeah, think so as well. And I'm reading James Baldwin right now. Like, I'm reading a lot of like readings about him, and he just
Hmm.
talks about like kind of uncovering this truth. And like in my class, I open it up to the public. So
Mhm.
anybody who wants to take the class can take the class from Zoom. And we had elementary school teacher from Honduras join the class, and he was telling me because we were it was like probably the middle of the semester in the lecture, and he just told me, he was talking, he was like, you know what, he's like, the history that you teach here, like, it's true, like it is true. He's like, but
Mhm.
it's the history that we can't teach here in Honduras, like we can't
Mhm.
teach that here. And I'm just like, really? Like, you don't teach this at all? Like the Central American history? He's like, yeah, we teach it. He's like, but it's very much like you said, it's taught from like the very privileged standpoint. It's taught within the, the eyes of like Christopher Columbus, and how
Mhm.
people, how they wanted their history to be taught, and it
Yep.
carried on until now. And it's sort of like kind of like here in America, where you're taught a certain history,
Mhm.
and somebody told me in class, or somebody responded to him in class and said that, oh, education is just a tool of indoctrination for whatever the state wants you to believe. And I
Yep.
was like, that's very true. That's very true.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like we're all living a lie that we tell ourselves, that, um, this is exactly how things were to be. But
Mhm.
if you were to be told something different, it can change your whole worldview. It can change, and some people just don't want that change. Some
Mhm.
people just they're afraid of it. They just
Mhm.
something that we fear, and trying to uncover the truth is also trying to uncover things that you may be uncomfortable with,
Yep.
because something that you
Mhm.
believe to be true for so long, and you think it's not true anymore, you know it can damage your whole perspective. It can damage your everything that you work for, maybe. You know.
Mhm.
But yeah, I can go on about that for days too. But it's like,
Oh yeah, me too. Me too. Believe me, I it's something that I'm very passionate about. Like I said, is every time I talk about the perspective, right, coming from Central America, is like, right, like, I tell my parent, like my cousin, and one time I had a cousin who told me, pero vos ya no vivís allá. ¿Qué te importa? Pero vos ya no vivís acá. Me importa,
mom always
because I have
tells
a
me
lot
that.
of family. I have a family over there. Me importa
Yeah,
because I see it from from eyes, los ojos de afuera, not from the perspective you think that I'm looking at, like gringo view, right? Because that's what they always tell me, like, oh, you're looking at it from the perspective of like a gringo. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it that I'm seeing how harm our community has been, and how it is important for us to learn that, right? And then not just because, oh yeah, ya me fui, de Latin America, me fui de Central America. It's not that I'm not gonna care. I care more and more and more. And like again, it is now, like, Central American studies, I feel like it's a very important. And I will personally say, like, I think I have questioned why doesn't, like, the DMV area over there in like DC, Maryland, and Virginia doesn't have a Central American, when they have such a huge Central American population, right? And then also,
yeah,
like, in this case, like in California, yeah, we have one. And then, like, UCLA is trying to push another one. And I know there's a community, right here in East LA, community college is trying to push another one. But then why is it so hard? Like, why is this, like, I was like, why is this so hard to, like, people that just listen, and they're like, well, there's a need, for it, like,
yeah, yeah. And we get into these conversations
hmm
with different people who are in power positions of power here in UC Berkeley. Trying to convince them is probably the hardest thing ever, because you have to convince people that there's a need for it.
hmm
And how do we convince people that we need it? So we have the class, it has full
hmm
enrollment every semester so far that we've had it, and
hmm
that shows them that there's a need. People want to take it, and we even have people on the wait list that we have to turn down.
hmm
So people want to take this class, people really do, but it all comes from the leadership. Like, if there's nobody in power that's willing to listen to you and
hmm
actually take action, that's the most difficult part, because
hmm
here you have UC Berkeley, who has a $6.4 billion endowment every year, and they're trying to become a Hispanic serving institution, but they don't have any plans for Central American studies.
Mhm.
And we've been talking to them about it. I've been trying to get in meetings with Carol Chris, who's our
Mhm.
chancellor, and she doesn't want to talk to us. Or I don't think it's that maybe she doesn't want to talk to us, but she's never taken any action to responding to our emails. None of her staffers are responding to us. We even emailed the vice chancellor and the other vice chancellor and all these different vice chancellors. We email everybody, but nobody has gotten back to us.
Mhm.
Nobody. There's not one person who's willing to take action, and it gets frustrating. It gets frustrating to the point where I'm just like, I've been at this for a year. Like
Mhm.
it's not just me, but it's everybody else in Central Americas for empowerment. Me and
Mhm.
everybody else in this organization, and we've been pushing for it for such a long time. And a lot of us are going to graduate now,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of Central American students on campus. It's probably like 2% of the campus,
Mhm.
but the students that we do have here that are here for a long time, we're trying to pass on the baton to them to continue it
Mhm.
going. And I feel like even then they're probably still gonna ask me for like some help or something, or like um but they yeah,
Mhm.
it's just difficult, especially when you consider people graduating,
Mhm.
people moving on to different steps of their life, and trying to find the Central American students who want to push that. That's the
Mhm.
most important part, because a student may feel the need to you know may feel proud to be Central American, may want to learn about these things, but if they truly understand the importance of it, that's the
Mhm.
most important part. Because if you
Yep.
understand the importance of it, you know that in the future there's gonna be a lot of students who are gonna take this class, even major in it. Imagine that, majoring in Central American studies. I would love to major in that. Um, but you know, you have to teach people the importance. People have to see it. And I've taught a lot of the young members of the group
Mhm.
the importance of it, and they're really on board. Like they really want to continue it going. Um,
Mhm.
but we need somebody to listen. Like
Yeah.
we haven't had anybody who listened to us yet, and
Yeah.
that's what we're lacking right now. We're coming out with a symposium at the end of the year
Mhm.
to try to talk about it. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
we just need someone to listen, and that's
Yeah,
pretty much it.
exactly.
It's not so difficult.
Exactly. And it's just so sad, like that's what I'm saying. Like it's like, wow, to get someone to listen, like why can't they just listen how important it is, right? Like of course, like to them to someone might be like, well, it's like the same thing. Like we already have the program, but it's someone who, even if you're not part of the community, someone who would sit down and listen to you say the points, say the reasons, say the importance, the whys, and all that, even if it's 2%, even if it's 2% only on Central American study. When I was going to Northridge, like, yeah, there was a lot of Central Americans and like majoring, but there was a lot of people who just wanted to learn, just
Yeah,
wanted to learn because this is not taught. No le enseñan. So like there's a lot of people who want to and willing
yeah,
and want to put the effort, and I was like always amazed because like even me as a Central American tampoco, like I would read and I would have my notes, but like I saw so many people like they weren't even part of the community, that they weren't Hispanic. They had like notes after notes, and I was just like, ay Dios mío, like
yeah,
like I feel like damn, I'm not doing my like research right, but I became like, ¿cómo se llama? Me sentía como honrada, like no honrada like personalmente, but like in as a like someone who would legit just want to learn, right?
yeah.
And there's another thing that like, yes, we for us might be an importance, for us might be like a need, but for others they just want to learn, right? And they don't have to be Central
Mhm.
American to go through that, and then they don't have to go and right now that we were talking about research, like we couldn't find it. That was the one, and I also like the main reason why I started like decided to open the call for volunteers on the podcast, because as much as I wanted to, you know how the research takes a long, long time. And I was like, it's so hard to find Central American research. So when I was able to, put a call, and then, like, I had it, like, the team now in the podcast, I was able to, hey, I have always loved to do research, and how can we do it? And then, like, we go and we find these topics, and they do it, and, like, we just post one, and oh my god, like, the amount of overwhelmed love that that post got. And I know this is, I'm talking in the perspective of social media, of course, but that's how I can tell there's a need. And how can
Yeah.
I tell? How can I you know what I mean? Like, how it was a post. It was a post that legit just says where Central Americans are located. It was as simple as that. Of course, like, Fatima, who is an amazing researcher, like, did the whole work and everything. But, like, it post that just we just made it accessible to people. Like, I can tell there's a need for Central American study.
Mhm.
There's a need for people who want to learn about our community or issues or history, and people legit just don't want to listen.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the end of my class last semester, I had like about 5 to 10 students who emailed me saying, like, this was the most important class that I ever had been taught in my entire life. Some people said that, this is like, resistance in itself. Just learning about these things and learning about it from the perspective of Central Americans, but also
Mhm,
learning at it from a perspective of trying to combat ideologies of anti-blackness and anti-indigeneity.
mhm,
um, but also a lot of students told me that they changed their major after that. They're like, oh, I changed my major to Latin American studies because you really inspired me to learn more about this. And just from those responses itself, like, it made me feel good. I was like, wow, I didn't think that I was doing this while teaching the
mhm,
class. I was just trying to teach the history. I was trying to teach those two things that I told you about earlier.
mhm,
But um yeah, when I heard that, I was like, this is what it's here for. That's what Central American studies can be. It can be
mhm,
inspirational. It can teach you about so many different things. It's interdisciplinary because you're not just learning about a history. You're not learning about just ethnography. You're learning about sociology. You're learning about gender, women studies. You're learning about political science,
mhm,
economics, sociology. All of these different things, like, are meshed together in this, and you can learn so much from it. And yeah, I think that's the most important part. And I think once the university sees that need, it's gonna be no problem trying to get that department done.
mhm,
Because I just talked to Cal Matters about Central American studies, and it's crazy because I had reached out to so many people, emailed them through the cafe email, but when it comes down to a journalist, emailing them, they're so fast to respond. When I saw the vice chancellor gave a comment about Central American studies in that article, I was so mad because I was like, because first of all, he replied but never replied to us. Second of all, um, he said that, oh, we'll look into a name change. And I was like, you know what? We're not looking for a name change. We're looking for a department. And that's a whole different thing. That's a whole
mhm,
different ballpark. And the main thing that we get so far is that it costs too much money. I've talked to students who are, in positions of student government, the academic vice president or whatever, and I told them, "Can you get me into a meeting with them because I want to talk to them about this?" And then even that person just told me, "No, it's probably going to be impossible because it's too much money. They don't have money right now." It's like, why are you telling me this as a student? Like, why don't you get me in that meeting first to let me tell them, and they can deny me, instead of
mhm,
you denying me before I even get to the room.
mhm. I got you. Mhm.
It's those. It's You can see me getting mad about it already.
I know, I get you. Right here, we both were getting mad at the same thing.
Yeah, because
No, but
it's
I feel you.
frustrating. It's just frustrating. But
No.
I'm hoping that one day I'm thinking 2 to 3 to 4 years from now, a Central American Studies will be here at Berkeley. I'm hoping so.
Yes. Yes, let's manifest that. I think I'm gonna be emotional now. I'm sorry. That sounds so beautiful because it's like, man, like at the end of the day, I always tell people like in this example, the work that you're doing, the work of cafe, the club, the work of so many Central American like clubs around the United States, the work of so many Central American students have led us to like, and the one to not feel alone. That is right. That is our right to request that, right?
Hmm.
And then so happy that we might not see los frutos of our all these years of emailing for you, all these years of like,
Yeah.
come on, let's just do. You may not see it. You may not see it, but someone else will, and that's when
Yeah.
you will know like it was worth it. It was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because even with me with the podcast, like sometimes like, why, a ver, ¿cuándo voy a ver los frutos? You know what I mean? But like, if at least if someone out there, like legit, if I can change someone out there to listen to us, to be like, wow, I wanted to learn more about Central Americans.
Yeah.
That's what I needed.
Then
And
that's all you need.
and that's it. Just someone to listen and someone that, the future or future generation, the younger Central American, can have what we have been asking for so long.
Yeah.
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 But Osiris, thank you so much. Before closing, we want to talk about the event that we have together that is
Yeah.
coming up. I'm so excited. People here, we had an episode before about the Pelesa film, so they're already a little bit familiar about the film. But I am so excited. This is the first podcast, event, and I'm excited to, join the cafe in Berkeley and have this screening. So yes.
Yeah, and we're gonna have pupusas too. So if y'all want to come through, come through for that. But it's also, I suspect, a great documentary.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to see it. It will be in the Social Sciences Building, Room 60, at Berkeley. So if you're in the area and you're listening right now, um, you know, go down
Yeah.
there and see what's up.
Yes, yes, just come join us, come watch the documentary with us, come eat pupusas with us, and
Yeah,
then from our part, we're gonna have some merch. So if you want to just rep Central America, but I'm so excited, like I'm so thrilled, like I already have everything ready to go, like it's I am very very excited and so happy and happy to see that a lot of our communities come and watch them. It's a documentary that that documentary, I know I have an episode about it, but they reached out to me because I didn't know, and once I found out like about this uprising that happened in the Mount Pleasant Street over there in DC, and it happened after the police sadly shot to death is Salvadoran. So it talks about like police brutality, about like Salvadoran diaspora, the Salvadoran Civil War. So a lot of other topics that we have share here with us, Osiris. So you know just come and join us, and it will be so fun. I know.
yeah.
Yes. Well, before any closing, Osiris, anything you might want to say?
Um, No, if anybody's interested in taking the class that I was talking about, we teach it every semester. Next semester will be taught by one of our students, and yeah, that reminds me, I have to submit something in order to keep it going. So I'm probably gonna do that
Okay.
right after. Yeah,
Right. Yes, yes, yes. If you can send me the link and I will add it right here, or any information, that way I can add it into the notes.
yeah.
That way they
Just
know.
we always post on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Just follow Cafe UCB
Mm-hmm.
on Twitter and on Instagram, and you'll be able to see all of our updates, all the events that we're trying to do, the class and stuff like that. It's all posted on there.
Yes, yes, definitely. So thank
Yeah.
you so much, Sarah, to come here to talk about this Central American study to talk about your, story, your mom, and everything. It was a pleasure having you here. Can't wait to meet you in person
Yeah.
next week. So yes,
All right. Thank
thank you
you,
so much.
Alejandra. I appreciate you having me. Thank you for letting me talk on this podcast.